Well, in this lecture, I want to speak with you about the Enlightenment. And I told you earlier in the course that I think we could look at the Protestant Reformation as a great step forward, in a leap forward, you might say, in the history of the church in the era that we're discussing in this course. And I think that the Enlightenment, in many ways, is not a step backwards, but a step down from those things. So a negative period that the church then is forced to wrestle with and deal with in its own existence. The Enlightenment is a difficult period to quantify, to say it took place from this era until this era. You know, if you're looking for a range of dates, you might say from 1650 till about 1800, but really I think you could extend those in both ways and say it's longer further back, and it continues even much more until the much more recent past. I want to read a few definitions of the Enlightenment before I get into some of the particulars of this movement. Now, first, let me just say, in a previous lecture, I was wrong, and I thought I was wrong, in dating the cooperative program in the Southern Baptist Convention at 1920. It really did start, as I thought, even as I was thinking and speaking in that lecture. It began in 1925. So you'll just want to know that. The New International Dictionary of the Christian Church says this of the Enlightenment: a movement seen particularly in clear-cut form in 18th century Germany, 1700s. Karl Barth characterized it as a system founded upon the presupposition of faith in the omnipotence of human ability. Immanuel Kant defined it in his Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone in this way: the Enlightenment represents man's emergence from a self-inflicted state of minority. Have the courage to make use of your own understanding, Kant said, is the watchword of the Enlightenment. It's predicated upon the reliability of reason, and it rejected both supernatural revelation and man's sinfulness. God, the all-wise Creator, had implanted in man a natural religion which taught both morality and immortality. So that's the New International Dictionary of the Christian Church. Clyde Montrek, in his A History of Christianity in the World, says that in the Enlightenment, man slowly became confident that the world about him was not a mysterious realm directed by the inscrutable will of God, but a realm of complex relationships that were subject to intelligible laws. Remember, this is the age of great scientific exploration and discovery. Man's rational powers, in league with science, made dependence on God seemingly unnecessary. Former distrust of man's reason and human culture, as seen in the traditional emphases on depravity, original sin, predestination, and self-denial, gave way to confidence in reason, free will, and the ability of man to build a glorious future. I think that's a helpful definition. Again, looking at it theologically, and even looking more theological, and I think more helpful in many ways, is Karl Barth. Barth, in reflecting on the Enlightenment, said this: the theology of the Enlightenment did not begin, as it's often shown to begin, with a criticism of Trinitarian and Christological teaching, or of the miracles of the Bible, or of the biblical picture of the world, or of the supernaturalism of the redeeming event attested in the Bible. Its starting point in rational orthodoxy, which was conservative in all of these matters, was rather a re-adoption of the humanistic, Arminian, Socinian, and finally the Roman Catholic rejection of what were supposed to be the too stringent assertions of the Reformers concerning the fall of man, the indissolubility of human guilt, so the connection of us and sin to Adam, the radical enslavement of man to sin, the bondage of the will. Originally and properly, enlightenment means the enlightenment that things are not quite so bad with man himself. So isn't that interesting? What Barth is saying, and what Montrek said as well, is simply that the Enlightenment, because of these great explorations and discoveries that were taking place, that the Enlightenment basically was the view that people are better than we had thought that they were before. And because of that, because we have free will, because we're not connected in guilt with Adam, because we don't have original sin, then it overturned eventually all sorts of religious theological practices and led to problems that we'll trace out in a subsequent lecture as we speak about the impact of the Enlightenment on modern theology. What I want to do, though, first, before we do that, is just give you the contours of Enlightenment thinking. And I'm going to do that through looking at two schools of the Enlightenment especially. Before we do that, though, I want to summarize the Enlightenment in a number of principles that scholars have pointed out in studying and thinking about the Enlightenment. First of all, first principle of the Enlightenment would be reason. And reason replaces revelation in the Enlightenment as the final arbiter of truth. Second is the Enlightenment principle of nature. Nature. The universe is orderly. It has lawful characteristics. It acts in orderly ways. It's a closed system. God is not an actor within the system. Okay? So the universe and nature, an orderly, closed system. The third Enlightenment principle is autonomy. Autonomy from external authority. So instead of someone else telling me, this is what you must do, Sean, no, I have autonomy as an individual. I'm my own person, right? Fourthly, fourth principle is harmony. Harmony. The universe is orderly because God created it in an orderly fashion, although He doesn't act within it, but yet it's orderly. We can count tomorrow on the same things happening as happened today. Fifthly is the Enlightenment principle of goodness. Again, original sin was denied. That was the chief theological culprit according to the Enlightenment. And so what you see working out following these Enlightenment principles then is the emphasis placed on education as the means to moral transformation within the society. Because other things corrupt, we need to educate. So you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau and others, and the whole public school system emphasis in America really being formulated upon this Enlightenment principle. Number 6 is the principle of progress. It is inevitable, and we can bring progress about through technological advances, and we can create, in a sense, a better world. I'm not counting these very well. I think number 7, the next principle, is a real antipathy towards Christianity. And so you have the rise of the higher critical method in biblical interpretation. It's anti-historical as well, and that's really the next and the final quality or principle of the Enlightenment, is this anti-historical attitude. We don't care what people in the past taught or thought or said, because they were stupid. And we are our own free people, individual autonomous agents, and we don't need anyone to tell us, basically, in so many words, what what it is that we should be doing. And so I think that that's a helpful way, I hope it's helpful for you at least, a helpful way to think about the way in which the Enlightenment is formulated upon these principles. What I'm going to do is a good bit of intellectual history now with you as we think about this period of the Enlightenment. Sometimes this period is called not the Enlightenment, but the Age of Reason, to demarcate it from the previous age, so-called the Age of Faith. It's in this period that Francis Schaeffer, speaking big picture, but I think in a helpful way, said that in the Enlightenment, nature eats up grace. We don't need God's grace. We're not as bad as we thought we were before. Nature, the universe, reason, all of these things supplant grace, and we're able to take care of ourselves and progress and do much better than we thought that we had been able to do previously. The main sort of overarching phrase that might have encapsulated the so-called Age of Faith goes back to Augustine and Anselm of Canterbury, who said, "I believe in order to understand." I believe in order to understand. But so the priority, of course, was placed on faith. In order to understand the world and myself and others correctly, I need first to have a relationship to one outside of myself, to God, to the church, through revelation. So I first believe, and then I understand these things better, at least. But that is turned on its head, you see, in the Enlightenment, when you have Descartes and others saying, I understand in order to believe. Okay, I understand. That's really, I think, the catchphrase of the Enlightenment. I understand in order that I may believe. Well, what I'm going to do is begin with Descartes and walk you through a scheme of looking at these things that will get us from Descartes, and then we'll look at Locke and Hume and Kant. So just four thinkers, and I think that will be enough. Hopefully it won't get too dense for me or for you as we think together about this. But all of these being just steps along the way, and Kant, at least in my scheme of things here, is going to be the one who synthesizes a couple of different ways of looking at how we have certainty of knowledge. And I think that at least that's what I'm talking about here, is certainty of knowledge. Well, the place I want to begin is with René Descartes. Descartes' years were 1596 until 1650. And Descartes, as a mathematician, a very accomplished mathematician, you might remember from geometry that we have Cartesian coordinates and so on, named after Descartes. So a very accomplished mathematician wanted to have the same kind of certainty concerning knowledge that he thought that he had concerning math as well. So what you have Descartes doing is, first of all, saying we must doubt everything. That is, we doubt everything about which doubt may be entertained. And then we have certainty about the other things. And you have a sort of rationalism, in Descartes. So an emphasis on correct use of reason, rationality here, where I need to rely upon observation, but my observation may be wrong. I can no longer rely upon experience. either. Rather, the one thing that will not ever delude me is rational argumentation. And so he says things like this: whatever else we can doubt, we cannot doubt one thing. And that one thing that we cannot doubt is the fact that when we're asking ourselves this question, we're doubting. Okay, so that's the one thing we cannot doubt. So this leads to his famous cogito ergo sum, right? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Augustine, surprisingly, had said, I sin, therefore I am. How do I know I exist? Because I'm a sinner. But not Descartes. He said, I think, I cogitate, therefore I am. Then he tried to prove the existence of God using a variety of arguments. And he said this then, thirdly, since I exist, I know, since God exists. Thirdly, since God is perfect, He would not deceive us. He wouldn't allow us to think that our ideas, this rational component in us, that our ideas were right, if indeed they were wrong. Thus, we can rest assured that our logical, rational deductions are true. Okay, so this kind of rationalistic deductionism or deductivism is very clearly begun with René Descartes here. And so I think what you see with Descartes is really one letter, one word, which is at the very centerpiece of the Enlightenment project. I must doubt everything until it's proven true. I am central to the whole process. I, the subject, am much more significant than any object outside of me. So this kind of subjectivism, the subjectivity, is paramount and prominent, and any sort of objectivity outside of me in the church, in the Bible, it's gone. Okay? Very different orientation, I think, from a Christian worldview, which asserts that God is very central, and everything else must line up and orbit around Him. But God's central, and we and others have to get in the appropriate relationship with Him. Okay? But this is Descartes, and Descartes really sets things in motion, and you get this rationalistic component to him. Then you have another school of the Enlightenment enterprise, and I'm going to look at that through John Locke, especially. John Locke. And this is what we sometimes call empiricism. Empiricism. And since John Locke, this empirical approach, just the facts, ma'am, let me see what's there, and then I'll tell you if I think it's true or not. This let's examine the evidence approach has very much characterized the world, the Western world in which we live. In 1690, Locke published his essay concerning human understanding, where he said that ideas that we have come either from sense experience, so empiricism, or from reflection. He said there are two kinds of ideas. There's knowledge, which is certain. So knowledge is one kind of idea. It's certain. And then judgment, which is just probable because it's based on opinion. And then he said we have different ways of attaining this knowledge. Okay, remember, knowledge is what we're after because it's certain. We have three different ways. We have sensitive knowledge, demonstrative knowledge, and intuitive knowledge. Intuitive knowledge is self-evident. So, for example, we know that we exist. You don't have to prove to yourself that you exist. It's self-evident. Demonstrative knowledge is applied by, or is gained by applying reason to intuitive knowledge. So as I know I exist, I apply reason to that intuitive knowledge, and I then demonstrate that you exist. And then sensitive knowledge is where we, from experience, gain knowledge empirically of other things. Okay? So we prove, or we know our own existence intuitively. We demonstrate God's existence applying this reason to, I think I misspoke before, but it's applying this reason that we exist back, and we ask, how did we get here? Well, God created, so we demonstratively show that God exists, and then sensitively we know through experience, through sense data, that other people exist. Okay? So in all of these ways, Locke is thinking long and hard about empiricism, about how do we sift through data that we receive. In 1695, he published a work called The Reasonableness of Christianity. And here you see Locke moving in more of a deistic, rationalistic, this is sort of a movement towards rational Christianity in more of a deistic direction. He says not all Scripture is revelation. Adam's fall brought death, certainly, but not guilt. Jesus did come to show us the way to life, but it's primarily by showing us how to live, obeying the law, and the miracles of Jesus were primarily to show us that He's a teacher to whom we should pay great attention. And eternal life comes by trusting in Jesus as this teacher and by sincere obedience to His way of living. And so following Locke, you get a whole flood of books promoting this kind of rational religion. Okay? So Descartes, this deductive kind of rationalistic notion, Locke, empiricism. And we're only going to be talking about two more. And here it gets very interesting. The first one is David Hume. Hume, who died in 1776, so it's easy to remember at least the year of his death. Hume is the one who really questioned more than others before him the power of reason. Everyone else had assumed it, but he really questions it both in its inductive and in its deductive sorts of schemes, by arguing that logic, which everyone had assumed before him, logic is merely a habit of mind. It's not an observable truth. It's just a habit. It's not something that we actually can see. So what he hoped, or what he said he was doing, was showing both that Descartes and Locke, both this rationalism and this rationalistic type of Christianity, were invalid arguments. Well, he does it in many ways. One of the ways that he shows it is to show how people have disagreed with each other throughout history. And he said, actually, the result of all of philosophy is the observation of human blindness and weakness. Okay, you might agree with that statement. The result of all philosophy is the observation of human blindness and weakness. We see how little people actually know. All knowledge, he says, comes from the senses, but the senses don't provide us with truths of logic. We just get data, and then we formulate relationships between the data. So really, the thing that you'll want to remember, especially about Hume, is the way that he attacked causality. He attacked causality. And this cause and effect relationship, which philosophers and theologians assume, Hume said is just that. It's an assumption which cannot be proved. cannot be demonstrated empirically to be causality. We observe temporal relationships. So first A, then B. And what we assume is that A caused B. And Hume did many illustrations to show that that just doesn't work. So you walk in the grass on Monday, and the grass is dry. Monday night, you hear a thunderstorm, and Tuesday you walk in the grass, and your feet get wet. And you assume from that it's because it rained Monday night that the grass is wet on Tuesday. But you don't know that, do you? Could be any number of other things that cause the grass to get wet. But you assume, because you're taught as a youngster, to assume this cause and effect relationship. He used the illustration of billiards, of playing pool. And he said, you hit one ball with your pool stick. What's that thing called? I don't know. I don't play pool. But you hit it with a stick, and it goes and strikes another ball, and then the second ball moves. Lo and behold. And you assume that it's because ball A hit ball B that it caused ball B to move. But what if, he said, there is some law of pre-established harmony? He even used that language. What if, from all eternity, God had ordained that there would be a supernatural force that would cause ball B to move on its own? You don't know that it didn't happen that way, do you? All you know is that first the one ball moved, and then, secondly, another ball moved. So Hume took great pains to show that these laws of logic, so to speak, were merely assumptions. And then for him, he attacked several things then within the Christian faith. He was very skeptical of the Christian faith, especially miracles. Okay? And miracles, he said, we should not assume a miracle happened, because it's written in pages of a book written by people who lived many hundreds of years ago, whom we don't know. Okay, so why should we be led to trust them and their testimony over that of our own experience? Because we don't see people rising from the dead every day. We don't see people walking on water every day. All of these things. So miracles, by definition, cannot happen because we observe in our own experience that natural laws are to be followed, and so on and so forth. So really what you see Hume doing is showing the fallacious nature of Locke. Locke is trying to use logic, but he's doing it on the basis of a lot of assumptions of the Christian worldview that he had inherited. Hume would not allow that. And so many historians and commentators have said that Hume really put a knife in the heart of rational religion, just killed it. And so you have Christianity, at least in the rarefied elite intellectual circles of Europe at that time, really tottering and not being able to answer these charges. And so that's where we get to Immanuel Kant. Okay, Immanuel Kant, one of the probably three most prominent persons in the history of all of Western philosophy, the only other two being Plato and Aristotle. And Kant lived from 1724 until 1804. And so I think what you see really the life purpose, at least philosophically, of Immanuel Kant being is both an attempt to rescue philosophy and the Christian faith from these blows that Hume had put upon the Christian faith. So in our next lecture, we'll continue and look at this very difficult thinker, but a very important thinker in the evolution of this movement that we're calling the Enlightenment.